Somewhere right now, a genuinely capable person is quietly trading away their own influence, one small accommodation at a time, in exchange for something that feels safe in the moment, but is actually costing them considerably more than they realize. They soften a boundary because holding it might make someone uncomfortable. They agree with an opinion they do not actually share because disagreement might cost them a smile. They absorb one more unfair request because saying no might cost them their reputation as the easy, agreeable one everyone enjoys having around. This person is chasing likability, and likability, however pleasant it feels to receive, is one of the most fragile, most easily withdrawn currencies a human being can spend their life pursuing. 500 years ago, a sharp, unsentimental Florentine political thinker named Niccolò Machiavelli looked directly at this exact trade-off, the choice between being liked and being respected, and arrived at a conclusion that still unsettles readers today, 5 centuries after he first committed it to paper. Likability, he observed, is rented. It depends entirely on your continued willingness to please, and it can be withdrawn the instant you stop performing it, or the instant someone decides pleasing them is no longer your priority. Respect works entirely differently. Respect, once genuinely earned, does not evaporate the moment you disappoint someone. It survives disagreement. It survives a firm no. It survives the discomfort of an honest, difficult truth. Tonight, on The Hidden Mind, we are unlocking exactly how Machiavelli believed you build this second, considerably more durable form of power, and exactly what it costs you to keep chasing the first one instead. Let's begin, and let's finally build the kind of standing that actually holds up. Welcome to The Hidden Mind, the channel dedicated to uncovering the real mechanics of power, psychology, and human nature hiding beneath the surface of everyday life, including the quiet, costly trade many of us make without ever fully realizing it. If you are new here, you should know this is not a channel built around comfortable, feel-good affirmations. It is a channel built around the uncomfortable, unfiltered truths that actually change how you move through the world once you genuinely understand them. Today's video tackles one of the most quietly costly patterns a genuinely good, considerate person can fall into: the habit of prioritizing being liked over being respected. A habit that feels safe and socially smooth in the moment, but that Machiavelli's cold, clear-eyed study of power consistently identified as one of the fastest ways to quietly lose real influence over your own life and relationships. We are going to walk through exactly why likability and respect operate by entirely different rules, exactly how the pursuit of one frequently undermines the other, and exactly what it takes to build the considerably more durable, considerably more powerful form of standing that respect actually provides. This is not comfortable material, and it will directly challenge instincts many of us were taught from a very young age: to be agreeable, to avoid conflict, to keep everyone around us comfortable at nearly any cost to ourselves. But comfort has never built genuine, lasting influence, and this channel exists specifically to close that gap. Before we begin, I want to ask you for a few small things that genuinely matter to this channel and the growing community around it. If today's video gives you even one moment of real clarity, please take a couple of seconds to hit the like button. It is the simplest, most direct way to help this video reach more people who genuinely need it. Leave a comment below and tell us honestly whether you have caught yourself chasing likability at the expense of your own genuine standing. We read every single comment, and they genuinely shape what we build here next. If you know someone who bends over backward to be liked and quietly resents how little respect they actually receive in return, share this video with them. It might be exactly the shift they have been needing. And if you have not yet subscribed to The Hidden Mind, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now, because we release a brand new deep dive into power, psychology, and human nature every single week. Finally, if this channel provides real value to you, please consider supporting our work directly with a super thanks using the button below. Every single contribution genuinely helps us continue building this project. Let's uncover exactly why respect, not likability, is the currency actually worth building your entire life around. Why Machiavelli trusted respect over likability. Before we walk through the 7 lessons themselves, it is worth understanding exactly why Machiavelli arrived at such a firm, unambiguous preference for respect over likability. a preference that has often been flattened, in popular retellings of his work, into the crude, incomplete claim that he simply preferred cruelty to kindness. His actual reasoning was considerably more precise and considerably more useful than that crude summary suggests. Machiavelli observed, across the political landscape of Renaissance Italy, that likability, the simple desire to be liked by as many people as possible, was an inherently unstable foundation to build any lasting position upon, because being liked depends entirely on continuing to please the specific preferences, moods, and expectations of whoever's approval you are currently seeking, preferences that shift constantly, sometimes contradict each other entirely, and can never actually all be satisfied simultaneously by any single person, no matter how skillfully or how tirelessly they try. Respect, by contrast, does not depend on constant pleasing. It depends on demonstrated character, consistency, fairness, and a willingness to hold a position even when that position is not universally popular in the moment. A leader who was liked by everyone, Machiavelli noted with some genuine suspicion, was frequently a leader who had never actually made a difficult decision that required disappointing anyone, a pattern that, examined honestly, suggests weakness and avoidance considerably more than it suggests genuine competence or good character. A leader who was genuinely respected, even by people who did not always agree with or particularly warm to them personally, had typically demonstrated exactly the kind of consistent, principled conduct under real pressure that likability alone could never actually produce or sustain. This distinction is not simply a piece of historical political theory, it maps with remarkable precision onto ordinary modern relationships, workplaces, and families, and understanding it clearly is the foundation for everything else we discuss throughout today's video. Lesson 1. Likability is rented, respect is owned. The first lesson concerns the fundamental structural difference between these two forms of social standing, a difference worth understanding with genuine clarity before anything else in today's video will make full sense. Likability functions, in a very real and practical sense, like a rental agreement, continuously renewed only for as long as you keep meeting the specific, often shifting expectations of the person or group whose approval you are currently seeking. The moment you fail to meet those expectations, disagree with a popular opinion, decline a request, hold a boundary that inconveniences someone, the rental can be revoked, sometimes swiftly and sometimes permanently, regardless of how much genuine goodwill and effort you had invested in maintaining it up until that exact moment. Respect functions considerably differently, closer to genuine ownership than to a continuously renewed rental. Once someone has demonstrated, through consistent conduct over real time, that they are fair, competent, and willing to hold a position even when it is unpopular, that demonstrated character tends to survive individual moments of disagreement or disappointment, because the underlying foundation was never actually built on constant, uninterrupted pleasing in the first place. Consider how directly this distinction applies to ordinary workplace dynamics. A manager who is universally liked, who never enforces a difficult consequence, who always says yes to every request regardless of its actual merit, frequently discovers, at precisely the moment a genuine crisis requires real, difficult leadership, that this likability evaporates the instant they finally have to make an unpopular call, because the team's positive feeling toward them was never actually built on anything considerably more durable than continuous. A manager who is genuinely respected, who has occasionally made unpopular but fair decisions, who has held clear standards even when doing so temporarily cost them some measure of likability, discovers that this respect survives individual moments of disagreement considerably better, precisely because it was built on a foundation of demonstrated character rather than continuous, fragile pleasing. This lesson asks you to notice, honestly, which foundation you have actually been building in your own significant relationships. A rented, fragile likability that could be withdrawn the moment you stop performing it, or a genuinely owned respect built on consistent, demonstrated character that can actually survive real disagreement and real difficulty. Lesson 2. Every yes you do not mean is a loan against your own respect. The second lesson concerns the specific, cumulative cost of a habit many genuinely kind people fall into, almost without noticing, saying yes to requests, agreeing with opinions, and accommodating preferences they do not actually, genuinely share, purely to avoid the momentary discomfort of disagreement or refusal. Machiavelli observed that leaders who agreed too readily and too frequently, purely to maintain smooth, comfortable relations with whoever they happened to be dealing with in any given moment, gradually trained the people around them to expect this reflexive agreement, an expectation that, once firmly established, made any eventual disagreement or refusal considerably more jarring and more costly to the relationship than it would have been had genuine, honest disagreement simply been a normal, established part of the dynamic from the very beginning. Consider how this pattern accumulates in ordinary modern relationships. Someone who reflexively agrees with a friend's questionable decision purely to avoid an uncomfortable conversation, is taking out a small loan against their own future credibility, because the moment they eventually do express genuine disagreement on a decision that actually matters considerably more, that disagreement lands with far less weight and far less credibility than it would have carried had their opinions been established, all along, as genuinely their own, rather than a reflexive echo of whatever the other person already wanted to hear. This same pattern accumulates across a career, a family, and countless smaller daily interactions, each unmeant yes representing a small, quiet transaction, momentary comfort purchased at the cost of a small piece of your own genuine credibility and eventual influence, a debt that continues accumulating quietly until, eventually, your actual opinion carries considerably less weight than it otherwise would have, precisely because you have spent years training the people around you not to expect an honest, independent one from you in the first place. This lesson asks you to develop a genuine, ongoing awareness of exactly how often you say yes or express agreement, purely to avoid discomfort rather than because you genuinely mean it, and to begin practicing the considerably more difficult, considerably more respect-building habit of reserving your agreement specifically for the moments you actually, genuinely feel it. Lesson 3. The room you are not in decides more than the room you are in. The third lesson concerns a genuinely important insight about where your actual reputation and standing are truly determined, an insight that frequently surprises people who have spent considerable energy managing how they are perceived directly, in person, while paying considerably less attention to how they are actually discussed and perceived in their absence. Machiavelli observed that a leader's genuine reputation, the version that actually determined their lasting influence and the genuine cooperation they could expect from others, was frequently shaped far more by what was said about them when they were not present to manage or influence that conversation directly, than by how skillfully they managed their own direct, in-person interactions. Consider how directly this insight applies to modern professional and social life. Someone who is unfailingly pleasant, agreeable, and accommodating in every direct interaction, but who is known, in their absence, for taking credit unfairly, for being unreliable when genuinely tested, or for treating people differently depending on whether they have any immediate use for them, discovers that this carefully managed direct impression eventually means considerably less than the version of them being quietly discussed and shared once they leave the room. A version built entirely on what people have actually observed about their real, consistent character, rather than on the specific, managed performance offered directly to their face. Someone who occasionally disappoints people directly, who sometimes has to deliver an unwelcome no or an uncomfortable piece of honest feedback, but who is known, consistently, in their absence, for genuine fairness, genuine follow-through, and genuine consistency between how they treat people, whether or not those people are currently useful to them, discovers that this reputation, built in rooms they were never present to manage directly, carries considerably more lasting weight and genuine respect than any amount of skillfully managed direct interaction ever could on its own. This lesson asks you to shift a meaningful portion of your attention away from managing how each individual, direct interaction goes, and toward the considerably more important, considerably harder to directly control question of what kind of consistent character you are actually demonstrating. The kind of character that continues speaking for you accurately in rooms you will never personally be present to manage or influence. Lesson 4. Disagreement. used sparingly, is worth more than constant agreement. The fourth lesson concerns a genuinely counterintuitive, but genuinely important insight about the actual value of occasional, honest disagreement within a relationship or professional dynamic. An insight that directly challenges the instinct many people have to avoid disagreement almost entirely, out of a genuine fear that any friction at all might damage the relationship or the working dynamic they are trying to maintain. Machiavelli observed that advisors who agreed with every single decision and opinion offered to them, without exception, gradually lost genuine credibility and genuine influence over time, precisely because their continuous, unbroken agreement provided no genuine, useful information, offering nothing beyond an echo of whatever the leader already believed or wanted to hear, an echo that, once recognized clearly for what it actually was, tended to be discounted almost entirely when it came to any genuinely important decision. Advisors who occasionally, thoughtfully disagreed, who were willing to voice a genuinely different perspective, even when doing so carried some real, immediate social risk, retained considerably more genuine influence, and were taken considerably more seriously, precisely because their eventual agreement, when it did occur, carried genuine, meaningful weight, having been established as a genuine, independently considered position rather than a reflexive, automatic response. Consider how this insight applies directly to modern professional and personal relationships. A colleague who agrees with every single idea presented in a meeting, without exception, provides increasingly little genuine value to the decision-making process over time, because their agreement has stopped functioning as genuine, useful information and has become, instead, simply an expected, predictable formality that everyone has learned to discount. A colleague who occasionally, thoughtfully raises a genuine concern or a genuinely different perspective, even at some real social risk to their own immediate popularity in that specific moment, becomes someone whose eventual agreement genuinely means something and whose overall judgment is taken considerably more seriously as a direct result. This lesson asks you to develop the specific, deliberate courage to voice genuine, thoughtful disagreement, occasionally, even when doing so carries some real, immediate social discomfort. Understanding that this occasional friction, used sparingly and always in genuine good faith, considerably increases, rather than decreases your actual, lasting influence and respect over time. Lesson 5. Trying to be liked by everyone guarantees being deeply respected by no one. The fifth lesson concerns a genuinely important mathematical and psychological reality about the actual, practical limits of pursuing universal likability, a pursuit that Machiavelli observed, through repeated historical example, tends to produce a genuinely worse outcome than simply accepting that some meaningful portion of any given audience will inevitably disapprove of any position substantial enough to actually matter. Machiavelli understood clearly that any position, decision, or piece of genuine character strong enough to be worth having in the first place would inevitably fail to please absolutely everyone, because different people's interests, values, and preferences genuinely, legitimately diverge from each other, making universal approval of any meaningfully substantial position essentially, structurally impossible to achieve, no matter how skillfully or how exhaustingly someone tried to pursue it. Leaders who pursued this impossible standard anyway, softening every position, avoiding every meaningful stance, in a desperate attempt to avoid disappointing any portion of their audience, frequently ended up genuinely, deeply respected by considerably fewer people than a leader who accepted upfront that some disapproval was an unavoidable, structural cost of holding any position substantial enough to actually matter to anyone. Consider how this pattern shows up in ordinary modern life. Someone who tries desperately to be liked by literally everyone in their broader social circle, softening their genuine opinions, avoiding any position that might create friction with any single person, frequently discovers that this exhausting, comprehensive effort produces a surprisingly shallow form of broad, generic pleasantness, liked mildly by many, but genuinely, deeply respected and trusted by remarkably few, precisely because nobody has ever actually seen this person hold a genuine, substantial position clearly enough to know what they actually, deeply stand for. Someone who accepts, honestly and upfront, that holding genuine, substantial positions will inevitably create some friction with some portion of any given audience, and who holds those positions anyway, when they genuinely matter, frequently discovers, somewhat paradoxically, that they end up genuinely, deeply respected by a smaller but considerably more genuine and more valuable circle of people who have actually witnessed real character and real conviction rather than an exhausting, ultimately hollow performance of universal, generic pleasantness. This lesson asks you to make genuine peace with the fact that some meaningful disapproval is an unavoidable cost of holding any position substantial enough to actually be worth holding, and to stop treating universal approval as a realistic or even genuinely desirable goal in the first place. Lesson 6. Consequences. Build respect faster than compliments ever will. The sixth lesson concerns a genuinely important insight about the specific mechanism through which genuine respect is actually built over time. An insight that runs directly counter to the common assumption that respect is earned primarily through kindness, generosity, and pleasant interaction. Machiavelli observed that respect, in the genuine, durable sense discussed throughout today's video, was built considerably more reliably through consistent, fair enforcement of genuine consequences, holding people accountable to reasonable standards, following through on stated expectations, and being willing to accept real, difficult trade-offs when principle genuinely required it, than it ever was through the accumulation of pleasant compliments, favors, and accommodating gestures alone. Leaders who were consistently generous and accommodating, but who never actually enforced any genuine consequence or held any real, meaningful standard, frequently found that their considerable generosity, over time, produced surprisingly little genuine respect in return. Precisely because generosity without any accompanying standard or consequence tends to be interpreted, whether fairly or not, as an absence of genuine conviction or genuine strength, rather than as evidence of admirable, generous character. Leaders who paired genuine generosity with genuine, consistently enforced standards, who were willing to hold people accountable and follow through on real, sometimes uncomfortable consequences when circumstances genuinely required it, discovered that this combination produced considerably deeper, more genuine respect than generosity alone had ever managed to produce on its own. Consider how directly this insight applies to modern parenting, management, and friendship. A parent who is endlessly generous and accommodating, but who never actually enforces any meaningful boundary or consequence, frequently discovers that their children's respect for them, as distinct from their genuine, separate love for them, remains surprisingly thin, precisely because respect requires evidence of genuine standards being consistently held, evidence that pure, unconditional accommodation alone simply cannot provide. A manager who pairs genuine care and generosity toward their team with real, consistently enforced standards and real, fair consequences when those standards are not met, discovers that their team's genuine respect runs considerably deeper than a manager who offers generosity alone without any accompanying consistently enforced standard behind it. This lesson asks you to examine honestly whether you have been relying primarily on generosity and pleasant accommodation to build respect in your significant relationships, and to consider deliberately pairing that genuine generosity with real, consistently enforced standards and real, fair consequences, understanding that this pairing, uncomfortable as it may initially feel, produces considerably deeper and more durable respect than generosity offered alone. Lesson 7. The paradox. Respect arrives the moment you stop chasing approval. The seventh and final lesson concerns a genuinely fascinating psychological paradox that Machiavelli's own observations repeatedly confirmed, and one that continues to hold up remarkably well under modern psychological scrutiny. The tendency for genuine respect, and frequently even genuine liking, to increase considerably once a person genuinely, visibly stops chasing approval and begins operating instead from a place of genuine, secure self-possession, independent of whether that approval is actually forthcoming in any given moment. Machiavelli observed that political figures who visibly, desperately sought universal approval, whose every decision seemed calibrated primarily around avoiding disapproval rather than around genuine, considered principle, were consistently perceived, by allies and rivals alike, as fundamentally insecure and fundamentally less trustworthy, an unflattering perception that paradoxically made genuine respect and genuine cooperation considerably harder to obtain, precisely because visible neediness for approval reads, to most observers, as evidence of weakness rather than evidence of admirable character. Political figures who operated from a place of genuine, secure self-possession, making decisions according to considered principle rather than according to a visible, anxious need for approval, were consistently perceived as considerably more trustworthy and considerably more worth respecting, and this perception, somewhat paradoxically, frequently produced considerably more genuine liking and genuine approval as an eventual, secondary byproduct than the direct, desperate pursuit of that approval had ever managed to produce on its own. Consider how directly this paradox applies to ordinary modern social and romantic dynamics. Someone who visibly, anxiously seeks approval and validation in every single interaction, whose every opinion and choice seems calibrated primarily around securing agreement and avoiding any friction whatsoever, frequently finds that this visible neediness actually produces considerably less genuine respect and genuine attraction than a more secure, self-possessed presence would have produced, precisely because visible, anxious approval-seeking reads as a lack of genuine inner stability, a quality most people find considerably less compelling than they might initially expect. Someone who has genuinely, visibly stopped chasing approval, who makes decisions according to their own considered values and genuine judgment, rather than according to an anxious calculation of what will please whoever happens to be watching in a given moment, frequently discovers that this genuine self-possession produces considerably more respect, and frequently more genuine liking as well, than the desperate, direct pursuit of approval had ever managed to achieve. This final lesson ties together everything else discussed throughout today's video, because a person who has genuinely internalized the first 6 lessons, who understands that likability is rented while respect is owned, who has stopped offering unmeant agreement, who understands that their reputation is built in rooms they cannot directly manage, who has developed the courage for occasional honest disagreement, who has made peace with inevitable disapproval, and who has learned to pair generosity with genuine, enforced standards, has already, in effect, achieved the genuine self-possession this 7th and final lesson describes, arriving naturally at the specific paradox where respect, and frequently even the very liking they may have originally been chasing all along, finally becomes available, precisely because they have genuinely stopped needing it in order to feel secure in who they actually are. Bringing the 7 lessons together. Having walked through all 7 of these lessons individually, it is worth stepping back to see the coherent, unified philosophy connecting them into a single, practical approach to building genuine, lasting respect rather than fragile, rented likability. Understanding that likability is rented while respect is owned provides the foundational clarity that everything else discussed today builds directly upon. Reserving your genuine agreement specifically for the moments you actually feel it protects the eventual weight and credibility of that agreement when it genuinely matters most. Recognizing that your reputation is built considerably more in rooms you are not present to manage directly shifts your attention toward consistent, demonstrated character rather than merely skillful, managed impression. Developing the courage for occasional, thoughtful disagreement considerably increases, rather than decreases, your genuine, lasting influence over time. Making genuine peace with the mathematical impossibility of universal approval frees you to hold the substantial positions that actually earn deep respect from the people whose respect genuinely matters most. Pairing genuine generosity with real, consistently enforced standards produces considerably deeper respect than generosity offered entirely alone. And genuinely, visibly releasing the anxious pursuit of approval altogether, arriving instead at genuine self-possession, paradoxically tends to produce considerably more of both respect and liking than the direct, desperate pursuit of either one ever managed to achieve on its own. Together, these 7 lessons describe a genuinely more sustainable, considerably more powerful way of moving through relationships, career, and everyday life, one that trades the fragile, constantly renewed rental of universal likability for the considerably more durable, considerably more genuinely satisfying ownership of real, earned respect. Why this shift feels genuinely terrifying at first. It is worth naming directly, before we move toward practical application, exactly why the shift from chasing likability toward building genuine respect feels so genuinely frightening for many people to actually attempt, even after they have fully understood and intellectually agreed with everything discussed throughout today's video. For a considerable number of people, the pursuit of likability was never simply a preference or a habit. It was a genuine, deeply ingrained survival strategy, often developed in childhood, in families or environments where being agreeable, accommodating, and conflict avoidant genuinely felt necessary for maintaining safety, belonging, or basic emotional security. Asking someone with this kind of history to suddenly risk disapproval, to hold a boundary, to voice genuine disagreement, is not simply asking them to adopt a new social strategy. It is frequently asking them to override a deeply rooted, genuinely protective instinct that once served a real, important purpose in their life, even if that same instinct has since become considerably more costly than protective in their current, adult circumstances. This is worth acknowledging honestly, because pretending this shift is simple or comfortable for everyone equally would be dishonest, and would likely leave anyone genuinely struggling with this transition feeling as though something was uniquely wrong with them for finding it difficult. When in reality, this difficulty is a genuinely common, genuinely understandable response to asking a deeply ingrained protective pattern to finally stand down. Machiavelli's own writing, born from genuine personal experience with the real, sometimes brutal consequences of political disfavor in Renaissance Italy, never suggested that risking disapproval was without genuine cost or genuine discomfort. He understood clearly that holding a difficult position, disagreeing with someone more powerful, or enforcing an unpopular but fair consequence carried real, sometimes significant risk. His argument was never that this risk should be ignored or dismissed as trivial, but that the alternative, a life spent in constant, anxious pursuit of universal approval, ultimately carried a considerably higher and more corrosive cost over time. A slow, quiet erosion of genuine influence, genuine self-respect, and genuine standing that, while less immediately visible than the discomfort of a single difficult confrontation, accumulates into something considerably more damaging across the full span of an entire life. If this shift genuinely feels frightening to you as you consider applying it in your own specific relationships, that fear deserves compassion and patience rather than self-criticism, and it is worth beginning with genuinely small, low-stakes practice rather than expecting yourself to immediately, comfortably apply these lessons in your highest stakes, most emotionally significant relationships right away. The difference between respect and fear. There is a genuinely important clarification worth making directly before we move toward practical application, because the shift away from chasing likability can, if misunderstood or misapplied, drift toward an entirely different and considerably less healthy destination, the pursuit of being feared rather than genuinely respected, a destination Machiavelli himself explicitly warned against throughout his own writing, despite how frequently this warning gets lost in popular, oversimplified retellings of his broader philosophy. Genuine respect, the kind discussed throughout today's video, is built through demonstrated fairness, consistency, and genuine willingness to hold a principled position even when doing so is unpopular, qualities that inspire genuine trust and genuine cooperation from the people around you, freely given because they have witnessed real, admirable character over time. Fear, by contrast, is built through intimidation, unpredictability, or the deliberate infliction of genuine harm or genuine discomfort on others. And while fear can sometimes produce short-term compliance, Machiavelli was explicit and repeated in his warning that fear which crosses into genuine hatred consistently proves unstable and ultimately self-destructive, motivating exactly the kind of quiet resistance, sabotage, or eventual decisive rebellion that respect. This distinction matters enormously as you begin applying the 7 lessons discussed throughout today's video, because it is genuinely possible to misapply lessons like holding firm boundaries or enforcing consistent consequences in a way that tips from healthy, respect-building firmness into something considerably harsher and more punitive. a tipping point that produces resentment and fear rather than the genuine respect this entire video has been encouraging you to build. The test worth applying honestly, as you practice these lessons in your own life, involves examining whether your firmness remains genuinely proportionate and genuinely fair, applied consistently regardless of your mood or convenience in a given moment, or whether it has begun drifting towards something disproportionate, unpredictable, or genuinely intended to intimidate, rather than to simply, fairly hold a reasonable, previously communicated standard. Respect, properly built, leaves the people around you feeling genuinely secure in knowing where they stand with you, even when that standing occasionally involves disappointment or disagreement. Fear leaves people feeling genuinely uncertain, anxious, and quietly resentful, an outcome considerably closer to the fragile, ultimately unstable likability this entire video has been encouraging you to move away from, than to the genuine, durable respect it has actually been describing throughout. A closer look at what Machiavelli actually meant by being feared. It is worth returning, one final time, to Machiavelli's original, specific argument about fear and love, because it has been so thoroughly simplified and distorted across 5 centuries of popular retelling that most people encountering it secondhand walk away with a considerably cruder, considerably less useful understanding than what he actually wrote. His famous observation, that it is safer to be feared than loved if a leader cannot manage to be both, is frequently quoted in isolation, stripped of the considerable nuance surrounding it in his original text. Nuance that, once restored, aligns remarkably closely with the distinction between respect and likability discussed throughout today's video, rather than with the cruder, more literal reading of fear that his crude popular reputation might suggest. What Machiavelli was actually describing, when his full argument is read in proper context, was considerably closer to what we have been calling respect throughout today's video than to genuine fear in the sense of terror or intimidation. He specifically warned, in the very same passage most frequently quoted in isolation, that a leader must avoid being hated at all costs, and that hatred arose specifically from arbitrary cruelty, from seizing what rightfully belonged to others, and from behaving in ways that violated basic, reasonable expectations of fairness. The version of being feared he actually endorsed was considerably closer to commanding serious, healthy respect grounded in consistent, predictable consequence. A leader whose subjects knew clearly what to expect and trusted that fair, previously established consequences would actually be enforced consistently, rather than a leader who ruled through genuine terror, unpredictability, or arbitrary cruelty. This more careful, more accurate reading of Machiavelli's actual argument should reassure anyone who has felt some discomfort throughout today's video about where exactly the line sits between healthy, respect-building firmness and something considerably harsher and less defensible. Machiavelli's own, more careful argument was never actually advocating for the harsher, more literal version of fear his popular reputation often suggests. It was advocating for exactly the kind of consistent, fair, principled firmness that builds genuine respect. The same distinction this entire video has been carefully drawing throughout. A distinction considerably closer to his actual, complete argument than the crude, oversimplified version that has unfortunately become his most widely recognized legacy across the centuries since he first wrote it down. What changes in your relationships once respect becomes the goal? There is one final, genuinely practical observation worth sharing before we move toward today's close. A description of what actually tends to change in real, lived relationships once someone has genuinely internalized the shift from chasing likability toward building respect, rather than simply understanding the concept intellectually without any accompanying change in daily behavior. The relationships that survive this shift, and frequently deepen considerably as a direct result of it, tend to be the relationships that were genuinely built on something real to begin with. Relationships where the other person, once they encounter your newly established boundaries, your occasional honest disagreement, and your more selective, more genuine agreement, responds with genuine adjustment and genuine respect for this more authentic version of you, precisely because their original interest and investment in the relationship was never actually dependent on your continuous, unconditional accommodation in the first place. The relationships that struggle, or in some cases genuinely end, once this shift takes hold, tend to reveal something genuinely important and often painful about their original foundation. That they were, in fact, built considerably more on your continuous willingness to accommodate and please than either party had perhaps consciously realized at the time. A foundation that simply cannot survive the introduction of genuine boundaries, genuine disagreement, and genuine selectivity about your own agreement and attention. This second outcome, while genuinely painful when it occurs, is worth understanding honestly as useful, if difficult, information, rather than as evidence that the shift itself was somehow a mistake. A relationship that cannot survive your genuine, reasonable boundaries and your occasional, honest disagreement was likely never actually offering you the kind of genuine, durable respect this entire video has been describing in the first place, regardless of how pleasant and comfortable it may have felt while you were still continuously accommodating it. Machiavelli's own life, once again, offers a genuinely relevant demonstration of this exact pattern. The political relationships and alliances that survived his own eventual disgrace and exile, the friendships that continued corresponding with him warmly even after he had lost his official position and standing, were precisely the relationships built on genuine, mutual respect for his actual character, rather than relationships that had only ever valued his usefulness or his willingness to please while he still held formal power and formal position. This is, in the end, perhaps the most genuinely reassuring outcome of everything discussed throughout today's video, that the relationships genuinely worth keeping in your own life are precisely the ones that will not only survive this shift from chasing likability toward building genuine respect, but will very likely deepen and strengthen considerably as a direct result of it. How to actually start building respect instead of chasing likability. Understanding these 7 lessons intellectually is a meaningful first step, but genuinely building this shift requires deliberate, ongoing practice applied to your own specific relationships and circumstances, not simply passive agreement with the ideas presented throughout today's video. This is genuinely demanding work, considerably more demanding than it might initially sound, and it deserves real patience rather than an expectation of immediate, effortless transformation. Begin with an honest audit of your own current patterns, identifying specifically where in your own life you have been chasing rented likability at the genuine cost of owned respect. Where have you been offering agreement you do not actually, genuinely feel, purely to avoid momentary discomfort? Where have you been managing your direct, in-person impression carefully while paying considerably less attention to the consistent character you are actually demonstrating in situations where you are not present to manage that impression directly? Where have you been avoiding genuine, thoughtful disagreement almost entirely, out of a fear that any friction at all might damage a relationship or dynamic you value? Where have you been softening genuine, substantial positions in a desperate, ultimately futile attempt to avoid any disapproval whatsoever from any portion of your broader audience? Where have you been relying primarily on generosity and accommodation to build respect, without pairing that generosity with any genuine, consistently enforced standard? And where has a visible, anxious need for approval been quietly undermining the genuine respect and even genuine liking you were actually hoping to receive? This honest audit, uncomfortable as it may be to conduct with genuine rigor, is the essential first step, because you cannot deliberately shift patterns you have not first clearly identified and acknowledged in your own specific life and relationships. Once you have identified where these patterns show up most significantly for you, choose one area to focus your deliberate practice on initially, rather than attempting to overhaul every single pattern simultaneously, which tends to produce overwhelm rather than genuine, sustainable change. Practice offering your genuine, honest reaction the next time you feel the reflexive pull toward automatic agreement, even in a small, low-stakes situation, building the muscle gradually before applying it to higher-stakes conversations. Practice holding one small, genuine boundary this week, specifically in a situation where you would normally soften it purely to maintain someone's immediate approval. Practice voicing one small, genuine disagreement in a low-stakes setting, noticing how the relationship actually holds up considerably better than your anxious anticipation likely predicted it would. And throughout every single one of these practices, continue returning to the seventh lesson discussed today, checking in honestly with yourself about whether you are genuinely operating from considered principle and genuine self-possession, or whether an anxious underlying need for approval is still quietly steering your choices more than you would like to admit. A final reflection on what respect actually protects. Before we close today's video, it is worth sitting honestly with what this entire shift, from chasing likability toward building genuine respect, is actually working to protect, because it was never, at its core, about becoming cold, harsh, or genuinely unconcerned with how other people experience you. This distinction is worth restating clearly, since it is precisely the part of today's message most likely to be misread if taken only in passing. It was about protecting your own genuine standing, your own genuine influence, and, somewhat paradoxically, your own capacity for genuinely warm, honest relationships over the long term. Relationships built on real character and real mutual respect, rather than on a fragile, exhausting performance of constant, unconditional pleasing that inevitably, eventually collapses under the weight of its own unsustainable demands. Machiavelli's own life offers a genuinely compelling demonstration of exactly this distinction. He was not, by any credible historical account, someone who was universally liked, either during his active political career or in the centuries of controversy that have followed his written work ever since. He was, and remains, someone whose work commands genuine, serious respect, studied and debated seriously by readers who do not always agree with his conclusions, precisely because his observations were built on genuine, unflinching honesty about how power and human nature actually function, rather than on a comfortable, crowd-pleasing performance designed to avoid controversy or disagreement. This is ultimately what the shift from chasing likability toward building genuine respect actually protects. Not your capacity for genuine warmth and genuine connection, which remains fully available to the people who have actually earned it, but your capacity to remain standing, secure, and genuinely respected long after the fragile, constantly renewed rental of universal likability would have inevitably, eventually run out. That brings us to the end of today's deep dive into exactly why Machiavelli believed respect, not likability, was the currency genuinely worth building your life around, a distinction that, once genuinely understood, tends to change how you evaluate nearly every significant relationship and decision in your life going forward. Likability is rented, and it can be withdrawn the moment you stop performing it, while respect, once genuinely earned through demonstrated character, is owned outright. Every unmeant yes is a small loan against your own future credibility, one that eventually comes due when your genuine opinion is needed most. Your reputation is built considerably more in rooms you are not present to manage directly than in the rooms where you are working hardest to manage a direct, favorable impression. Occasional, thoughtful disagreement is worth considerably more to your lasting influence than constant, reflexive agreement ever will be. Trying to be liked by absolutely everyone guarantees being deeply, genuinely respected by remarkably few. Genuine consequences and consistently enforced standards build considerably deeper respect than generosity and compliments offered entirely alone. And the moment you genuinely, visibly stop chasing approval and settle instead into real, considered self-possession is frequently the exact moment both respect and genuine liking finally, paradoxically become available to you. Carry these 7 lessons with you, not as an invitation to become cold or genuinely unconcerned with the people around you, but as the genuine foundation that protects your standing, your influence, and your capacity for real, mutually respectful relationships over the long term, rather than the fragile, exhausting performance of universal likability that inevitably, eventually runs out. Before you go, I want to ask you once more for a few small things that genuinely matter to this channel. If today's video gave you real clarity about your own patterns, please take a moment to hit the like button. It costs you nothing and directly helps this video reach more people who genuinely need it. Leave a comment below and tell us honestly which of these 7 lessons hit closest to home for you. We read every single comment, and they genuinely shape the direction of future videos here on The Hidden Mind. If you know someone who bends over backward chasing likability and quietly wonders why they receive so little genuine respect in return, please share this video with them today. It might be exactly the shift they have been needing. And if you have not yet subscribed to The Hidden Mind, now is the perfect moment. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly deep dives into power, psychology, and the hidden mechanics of human influence. Finally, if this video delivered genuine value to you and you would like to directly support the growth of this channel, please consider leaving a super thanks using the button below. Every single contribution genuinely helps us continue building content exactly like this for you. Until next time, remember that being liked was never actually the goal worth chasing. Being genuinely, durably respected always was, and the difference between the two will show up exactly when you need it most, in the moments that actually matter. The moments a rented approval was never going to survive anyway. This has been The Hidden Mind, and we will see you again in the next one, standing a little steadier than before.